The reason my wife and I could afford our dream house was because of a horrible murder-suicide that happened here, driving the price down. I was just cleaning the attic and found a hidden security camera server. It contains the complete, unedited footage of what actually happened. The box is heavy in my hands, cold and solid. Dust, thick as felt, coats the black metal casing and my fingers, leaving pale gray streaks on my skin. It was tucked away behind a loose section of drywall, nestled in the scratchy pink insulation like a dark, forgotten egg. A single beam of sunlight from the grimy dormer window cuts through the swirling motes I've disturbed, illuminating the tangle of disconnected cables that snake from the back of the server. This wasn't just stored up here, it was hidden. I can feel the low thrumming vibration of the house around me, the furnace kicking on in the basement, the distant hum of the refrigerator, but a different kind of energy seems to radiate from this object. It's the chilling potential of a story that everyone thinks is finished. We'd heard the whispers, of course. The real estate agent called it a family tragedy. Our new neighbors with pitying eyes called it the Henderson incident. A quiet, unassuming accountant named Mark Henderson, a loving wife named Emily, and their 5-year-old daughter, Chloe. The official report, the one I had morbidly looked up online, said Mark's business failed, he spiraled, and one night he ended everything. It was neat, it was tidy, it allowed the house to be sold with a clean conscience and a 50% price drop. I backed down the rickety attic ladder, the server clutched to my chest like a shield. Each step groans under my weight, a sound that has become part of the house's language, but now it sounds like a warning. When my feet hit the solid oak of the upstairs hallway, the contrast is jarring. Down here, it's our home. Sunlight pours through the large window Sarah insisted on, illuminating the warm, neutral colors she picked out. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon drifts up from the kitchen. This is the life we built, a life of peace and careful planning laid directly over a foundation of unimaginable horror. I walk into the kitchen and place the server on the gleaming quartz countertop. It looks alien there. A piece of wreckage washed up on a pristine shore. Sarah turns from the coffee maker, a smile on her face that falters the moment she sees the box. "What in the world is that? Please don't tell me you found a dead squirrel." Her voice is light, but her eyes are fixed on the object, on the dust is shedding onto her clean counter. I wipe my hands on my jeans, a useless gesture. It was in the attic, behind a wall. I pause, trying to find the right words, trying to keep my own voice from shaking. "Sarah, I think it's a security server from when the Hendersons lived here." The name hangs in the air between us. The happy, sunlit kitchen suddenly feels cold. Her hand, holding her favorite ceramic mug, stills. "Alex, no," she says, her voice low and firm. "Take it back. Or better yet, take it to the dump. I don't want that thing in our house." "Just listen," I plead, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "The police report never mentioned a security system. They said there were no cameras. Why would they lie? Or why would this be hidden if it showed what they said it showed? The questions are spilling out of me now, a torrent I can't control. What if it wasn't him? What if something else happened that night?" Sarah sets her mug down with a sharp clink. Her face is pale. "Stop. Just stop it. This is exactly what I was afraid of when we bought this place. That you'd get obsessed, that you'd go looking for ghosts. It was a tragedy, Alex. A horrible, senseless tragedy. Let it rest. Let them rest." But I can't. Holding this box feels like holding a key. Maybe it unlocks nothing.
Maybe it unlocks a truth worse than the lie. But I can't stand not knowing. I can't live in this house, raise our future family in this house, with this question mark buried in the walls. I carry the server into my small office at the back of the house, Sarah's tense silence following me like a shadow. I find an old power cable and a monitor cord from a box of spare parts. My hands are trembling as I plug them in. With a deep breath, I press the power button. The machine whirs to life, its old fans spinning with a dusty groan. An outdated, generic operating system loads onto the screen. The desktop is empty, except for a single folder in the center. It's labeled with the date of the incident. My blood runs cold. I move the mouse, the cursor a shaky arrow, and double-click. The folder opens, revealing a grid of 24 video files, each with a timestamp and a label. Kitchen cam, hallway upstairs, living room. Then I see the last one. Nursery cam. A wave of nausea hits me. I force my eyes away, back to the first file, time-stamped just before the official time of death. The thumbnail is a frozen, low-resolution image of the Hendersons on their living room couch. They aren't fighting. They aren't even talking. They're huddled together, staring forward, with wide, terrified eyes. They're looking directly at the camera. And behind them, a shadow in the doorway is just starting to take shape. My finger hovers over the mouse, a millimeter of air separating me from the play button. The thumbnail is a frozen scream. It's the shadow that holds me, a vague darkness that seems to warp the doorframe behind them. It has no discernible shape, yet it feels intentional, predatory. This isn't a trick of the light, it's a presence. My own breath is loud in the silent office. The rational part of my brain, the part that negotiated mortgages and picked out paint colors, is screaming at me to shut it down, to take Sarah's advice and haul this metal box to the nearest electronic waste facility. But the rest of me, the part that now feels like a trespasser in my own home, has to know. I click. The video loads, pixelated at first, then sharpening into a clear image. The sound crackles to life, a low ambient hum, the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere out of frame. It's mundane, normal, but the couple on the couch are anything but. Emily Henderson has her hands clenched in the fabric of her husband's shirt, her knuckles white. Mark's arm is wrapped around her, a protective gesture that seems utterly futile. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, aren't looking at the camera anymore. They're darting towards a point to the left of the frame, something in the corner of the living room that I can't see. "Did you hear that?" he whispers, his voice tight with adrenaline. Emily just nods, a tear tracing a path through the makeup on her cheek. She's shaking so hard I can see it even in the low-resolution footage. The shadow in the doorway? It's gone. It was just a flicker in the thumbnail, a digital ghost. The real terror wasn't behind them. It was in the room with them. They sit there for what feels like an eternity, a minute and 12 seconds according to the timestamp. They're like statues of fear, listening to a sound I can't hear over the server's electronic hiss. Then Mark flinches violently, as if reacting to a sudden noise. "It's upstairs," he chokes out. "Oh, God. Chloe." He starts to get up, but Emily pulls him back down, her face a mask of pure panic. "No, Mark, don't leave me," she sobs, her voice a raw, desperate plea. "Don't go up there." He looks from her terrified face towards the unseen corner of the room, then back again, paralyzed by an impossible choice. The official story painted him as a monster, a man who broke.
But the man on the screen is a protector, trapped and terrified. He's not the villain of this story. He's a victim. The video file ends abruptly, cutting to black without a sound. My own heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. I feel sick. This wasn't a domestic dispute. They weren't fighting. They were defending their home, their family, from something else, something that was in the house with them. My gaze drifts back to the list of files, the grid of silent digital witnesses. My eyes land on it again, the one that makes my stomach clench. Nursery cam. This felt wrong, like peering into a place I had no right to see, a final, sacred space, a violation. But I couldn't stop. I had to know what happened to their little girl. I moved the shaky cursor and clicked again. The image is different. It's shot in night vision, casting the room in an eerie, monochrome green. I can make out a crib against the far wall, a rocking chair, a mobile with little smiling stars hanging motionless from the ceiling. For a moment, I think the crib is empty, and a wave of relief so powerful it makes me dizzy washes over me. But then I see her, a small shape under a light blanket. Chloe. She isn't crying. She isn't sleeping. The 5-year-old is sitting bolt upright, her small face turned not toward the camera, but toward the corner of her room. The same corner, I realize with a jolt of ice-water dread, that her father was staring at downstairs. She is perfectly still, her eyes wide in the ghostly green light, watching something just beyond the frame. She looks just like her parents, transfixed by an unseen horror. The only sound is the faint, rhythmic creak of the rocking chair, moving back and forth, as if someone had just gotten up from it, and it is completely empty. Then from the hallway, I hear a floorboard creak. Not in the video, in my house. The doorknob to my office begins to turn. My body went rigid, a jolt of pure primal fear seizing every muscle. My breath caught in my throat, a choked, silent gasp. The soft metallic click of the latch turning echoed in the small room, a sound as loud as a gunshot. The screen in front of me showed a ghost in a little girl's room, but the threat was here, now, in my hallway. The door swung inward, and I flinched back so hard my chair slammed against the wall. It wasn't a shadow. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, etched with a mixture of anger and deep, gut-wrenching worry. She didn't look at me, not at first. Her eyes were fixed on the monitor, on the ghostly green image of the nursery, the empty rocking chair, the small, still figure in the crib. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a quiet fury that was far more terrifying than shouting. "Alex, what are you doing?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. I could only gesture, a frantic, useless motion toward the screen. "It's not what they said," I finally managed, the words sounding thin and insane even to my own ears. "Sarah, they were scared. Something was in the house with them. I saw it. The little girl, she's staring at it right there in the corner, and the chair." I stopped, realizing how I sounded. I was pointing at a grainy image, babbling about shadows and moving furniture. Her eyes finally met mine, and the look in them broke my heart. It was pity. "You're watching the footage from their nursery," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a statement, an accusation. "You're sitting in here, in the dark, watching a video of that little girl's last moments." The way she said it made my skin crawl, shame and defensiveness warring inside me. "It's not like that," I insisted, my voice rising. "This is evidence. This proves Mark didn't just snap."
She took a step into the room, her hand covering her mouth as if to stifle a sob. Evidence of what? Ghosts? "Alex, this isn't a mystery to be solved. This is a family's private final horror. You've brought their digital gravesite into our home. Please," she begged, tears now shining in her eyes, "turn it off. For them, for us. Let them be at peace." I looked from her pleading face to the grid of files on the screen. Peace felt like the most impossible thing in the world. "I can't," I whispered. "I have to know what happened." Her face hardened. The hurt was replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. Without another word, she turned and walked out, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft, final click that felt more like a slam. The silence she left behind was heavier, more suffocating than before. I was completely alone now, with the ghosts on the screen and the growing chasm between my wife and me. My eyes were drawn back to the list of files. My argument with Sarah had only solidified my resolve. This wasn't just a morbid curiosity anymore. It felt like a duty. Mark and Emily Henderson weren't monsters. They were parents, terrified for their child. The official story had buried them in lies, and maybe I was the only person who could ever unearth the truth. My gaze fell on a file named Hallway Upstairs. Its timestamp just 2 minutes after the living room video ended. The path of the tragedy. I clicked it. The view was from a camera mounted high in the corner of the upstairs hallway, capturing the doors to the master bedroom in the nursery. It was dark, the image grainy and washed out. For a few seconds, it was a static, silent picture of an empty hall. Then I heard it, the sound of heavy, frantic footsteps on the stairs, just out of frame. Mark Henderson appeared at the top of the landing. He was holding a heavy metal mag light, gripping it like a club. He didn't look like a man about to commit an atrocity. He looked like every father in the world whose child had cried out in the night. He was moving slowly, cautiously, his head cocked as if listening for a sound only he could hear. He crept toward the nursery door, his back to the camera, every line of his body screaming tension and fear. He paused at the door, his hand hovering over the knob for a long, agonizing moment. I found myself holding my breath, my knuckles white on my own desk. He took one last deep breath, and then pushed the door open and slipped inside, the flashlight beam cutting a frantic swath across the opposite wall before he vanished from my sight. The camera recorded the empty hallway. I could see the nursery door slightly ajar. I was staring at that sliver of darkness, listening with an intensity that made my ears ring. There was no shouting, no screaming. There was a muffled thump, and then a sound that I will never be able to unhear. It was a low, wet, tearing noise, followed by a choked, gurgling gasp. It lasted only a second, and then it was over. Silence. A profound, absolute silence that was more horrifying than any scream. A moment later, Mark Henderson stumbled back out of the nursery. The mag light was gone. His hands were empty, hanging limply at his sides. His shoulders were slumped, his face utterly blank, as if every ounce of emotion and life had been scooped out of him. He was a hollow shell. He took 2 shuffling steps into the middle of the hallway and then stopped. Slowly, mechanically, he lifted his head and looked directly into the security camera. There was nothing in his eyes. No fear, no anger, no grief. It was the vacant stare of a man who had witnessed the end of his world and had his soul ripped out through his eyes. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring at me, through me, from a decade ago. Then, like a man in a trance, he turned and walked into the master bedroom, closing the door quietly behind him with a soft, final click that felt more like a slam. The video ended. I stared at the grid of files, my body shaking uncontrollably. There was only one left that mattered.
The cursor trembled as I moved it toward the last thumbnail, the final piece of the puzzle. Master bedroom cam. My finger felt disconnected from my body, a numb piece of flesh hovering over the mouse. A single click was all that separated me from the final act. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, a silent, desperate prayer to a God I wasn't sure I believed in, and then I pressed down. The click was soft, but it landed in my gut like a physical blow. The screen went black for a moment, before resolving into the final, terrible scene. The camera was positioned on a dresser, angled toward the bed. Emily Henderson was sitting up, her knees pulled to her chest, her back pressed against the headboard. She was staring at the doorway, her face a mask of pure terror. She had clearly heard what I heard from the hallway. She knew her husband had gone into their daughter's room, and she had heard the silence that followed. She was waiting for the monster to come through the door, never imagining it would be wearing her husband's face. The bedroom door opened, and Mark stepped inside. He was just as I had seen him in the hall, a vacant, shambling automaton. His movements were slow, unnervingly smooth. He closed the door behind him without making a sound and turned to face his wife. Emily let out a small, choked sob. "Mark, oh God, Mark, what happened? Where's Lily?" she whispered, her voice cracking. He didn't answer. He just stood there, his empty eyes fixed on her. And then I saw it. It was almost imperceptible, a trick of the grainy, low-light footage. The air around Mark seemed to shimmer, to distort, like heat haze off asphalt. And behind him, clinging to his back, like a monstrous shroud, was a shadow. It wasn't his own. It was too long, too thin, its edges sharp and unnatural. It seemed to writhe and pulse, a patch of absolute blackness that drank the light from the room. "Mark, you're scaring me," Emily pleaded, her voice rising in panic as he began to walk toward the bed. He moved with that same horrifying, fluid grace. He wasn't walking like a man. He was being moved, a marionette on invisible strings. As he got closer, the shadow on his back seemed to stretch, to lengthen, its form becoming more defined. It had limbs, long and spidery, that wrapped around his torso. One of them, a thin, needle-like appendage, rested on the back of his neck. Emily scrambled backward, pressing herself into the headboard until she seemed she might pass right through it. "Please, Mark, talk to me," she screamed. He reached the side of the bed and stopped. For a moment he just stood there, looking down at her. A flicker of something crossed his face, not recognition, but a deep, profound agony. A prisoner screaming from behind the bars of his own eyes. It was there and then gone. His hands, guided by the thing that wore him, reached for her. It wasn't violent, not in the way you'd expect. It was methodical, deliberate. He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she thrashed, her cries turning into strangled shrieks. The shadow behind him swelled, engulfing his upper body. He leaned forward, and the camera's angle, combined with the shifting darkness, obscured the exact moment of her death. There was no blood, no visible struggle. Her body just went limp beneath his hands. He held her there for a second longer, then straightened up, pulling away. He turned from the bedside table, where a handgun lay beside a lamp. He picked it up with the same detached, mechanical precision. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back at his wife. He raised the gun to his own head, his movement still not his own, and the screen flashed white as the sound of the shot blasted through my headphones. I ripped them from my head and threw them onto the desk, scrambling back in my chair as I gagged, bile burning the back of my throat. The video had ended.
The screen showed only the grid of files again, a neat and orderly collection of digital horrors. My entire body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. It wasn't a murder-suicide. It was an execution, a possession. Mark Henderson hadn't killed his family. That thing, that shadow puppet master, had used him to do it. It had broken him, hollowed him out, and then forced him to destroy everything he had ever loved before discarding the vessel. The police report, the news articles, the neighborhood gossip, it was all wrong. It was a lie built on a nightmare no one had ever actually seen. No one but me. The silence of the house pressed in on me. It was no longer a comforting quiet. It was the predatory stillness of the thing that was still here. I pushed myself up from the desk, my legs unsteady. I had to get out of this room. I stumbled to the office door, my hand shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to turn the knob. I stepped out into the familiar darkness of my own upstairs hallway, the same hallway I had just seen on the screen. My eyes were immediately drawn to the closed door at the end of the hall, our bedroom. Sarah was in there, and in my mind's eye I could see it all again. The shimmering air, the clinging shadow, the empty eyes of a man being driven to madness. I took a step toward the door, then another, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had to see her. I had to know she was safe. My hand didn't so much turn the knob as it fumbled against it, the cold brass a shock to my clammy skin. I pushed the door open with a slowness that felt agonizing. My breath held tight in my chest. Each millimeter of movement was a new frame of a horror film I was directing against my will. I was terrified of what I would see, and more terrified of what I wouldn't. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing the soft, moonlit tableau of our bedroom. And there she was. Sarah. She was asleep, curled on her side, facing away from the door. One arm was tucked under her pillow, the other draped across the empty space beside her. The pale blue light from the window traced the curve of her shoulder, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing visible even in the gloom. Relief washed over me with the force of a physical wave, so potent it almost buckled my knees. She was safe. She was here. The monster from the video, the puppeteer of shadows, wasn't in this room. I crept inside, closing the door as quietly as Mark Henderson had in the footage, which sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. I tiptoed to the side of the bed, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. I just stood there for a long moment, watching her sleep, drinking in the sight of her peaceful, oblivious calm. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. This was real. The quiet hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of a car passing on the main road, the scent of lavender from the diffuser on her nightstand. This was my life, my home, my wife. The videos, they were a ghost story, a terrible digital echo from a decade ago. It was over. It had to be over. But as I stood there, the initial tidal wave of relief began to recede, leaving behind a cold, slick residue of fear. The room felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watchful. The familiar shadows in the corners of the room, cast by the wardrobe and the tall bookshelf, seemed darker, deeper, as if the moonlight couldn't quite reach them. I found myself scanning the room, my eyes darting from one patch of darkness to another. I saw the way the air seemed to shimmer over the heating vent, my stomach clenched. I saw the long, thin shadow cast by the floor lamp and imagined it wrapping itself around an invisible limb.
The footage had poisoned me. It had rewired my brain, turning my sanctuary into a stage, and I was just waiting for the actors to appear. I looked back at Sarah, and the vulnerability of her sleeping form and a new, more potent terror took hold. It wasn't about me anymore.
It was about her. That thing had used Mark to get to his family. It had turned a husband and a father into a weapon. I looked at my own hands, half expecting to see them tremble with a will that wasn't my own. I felt a sudden, profound chill, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was a dead, empty cold, and it seemed to emanate from the corner by the window. My gaze snapped to it. The darkness there was absolute. It was a patch of night that had been cut out of the sky and pasted onto our wall. It wasn't just an absence of light. It felt like an entity in itself, a presence that was actively consuming the light around it. I stared, my heart beginning to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. It couldn't be. It was my imagination, my mind playing tricks on me, projecting the horrors from the screen onto my reality. But then, I saw it move. It wasn't a flicker or a trick of the eye. A sliver of the blackness detached itself from the corner, elongating like a drop of ink in water. It slithered across the floor, silent and fluid, a two-dimensional predator hunting in a three-dimensional world. It was moving toward the bed. It was moving toward Sarah. A scream was trapped in my throat, a choked, useless sound. My body was locked in place, paralyzed by a terror so pure and absolute it felt like a religious experience. The shadow crept closer, its formless shape writhing, its tendrils reaching, and in that moment, instinct finally broke through the paralysis. It was a primal, animalistic urge to protect my mate. I didn't think, I just acted. I lunged across the room, my hand slapping wildly against the wall for the light switch. My fingers found the plastic toggle, and I flicked it up. The overhead light blazed to life, flooding the room with a harsh, artificial glare. I blinked, my eyes watering from the sudden brightness. The corner was just a corner. The floor was just a floor. The shadow was gone. The only thing in the room was me, panting and wild-eyed, and Sarah, who was now sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with alarm. "What? What is it?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. "What's wrong?" I couldn't answer. I just stared at the empty space on the floor where the darkness had been, the ghost of its chilling presence still crawling on my skin. I knew what I had seen. It was here. It was still in our house, and now it knew that I knew. I had a nightmare, I stammered, the words feeling like sand in my mouth. My voice was a ragged whisper. I didn't dare take my eyes off the corner, half expecting the shadow to bleed back into existence the moment I looked away. The excuse was pathetic, a flimsy shield against an unspeakable truth, and we both knew it. Sarah pushed the duvet away, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The sharp, clinical light of the overhead lamp carved deep lines of worry into her face. "A nightmare? You lunged across the room like the house was on fire. You're shaking. Look at me." I finally forced myself to meet her gaze. The fear in her eyes was a reflection of my own, and it broke my heart. She saw it all. She saw that this wasn't sleep terrors or a bad dream. This was real, waking horror. "Tell me what you saw," she said, her voice dropping, losing its sleepy edge and gaining a firm, quiet intensity that demanded the truth. I couldn't speak, not in here, not in this room where the thing had just been. Every shadow felt like a listening ear. I shook my head, a frantic, jerky motion, and grabbed her hand. Her skin was warm, a shocking, living contrast to the dead cold I still felt creeping up my spine. "Not here," I managed to choke out. "Come with me. To the office." Her confusion deepened, but she didn't pull away.
She saw the desperation in my face and trusted it. She slipped a hand from mine for a moment to grab the silk robe draped over a chair, pulling it on as she followed me out of the bedroom. The short walk down the hallway felt like a mile-long trek through enemy territory. I kept my body between her and the shadows, my shoulders hunched as if to ward off a physical blow. The air in the hall was thick and heavy, charged with a static I could feel on my skin. The house was awake. It was watching us. I could feel its ancient, malevolent attention focused on the two of us, a spotlight of pure dread. I pushed open the office door and guided her inside, shutting it firmly behind us. I didn't turn on the light. The glow from the laptop screen was enough, casting the room in a sickly blue-white pallor. The final horrifying frame of the Henderson footage was still frozen on the screen. The empty hallway, moments after the tragedy. Sarah's eyes went straight to it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I collapsed into the desk chair, the strength finally leaving my legs. I gestured weakly at the screen, at the server box tucked beneath the desk. "I found it today," I began, the story tumbling out of me in a torrent of panicked, disjointed sentences. I told her about cleaning the attic, about the hidden panel, the dust-caked server. I told her about plugging it in, about the file names, the dates. I told her what I saw. I described the shimmering air, the way Mark Henderson's eyes went blank, the shadow that clung to him, puppeteering his limbs. She listened in absolute silence, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide and fixed on my face. She didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't tell me I was crazy. She just absorbed it all, the color draining from her cheeks until she was as pale as the moonlight outside. When I was done, the only sound was the quiet hum of the computer. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. I held my breath, waiting for the verdict, for the dismissal, for anything. Finally, she lowered her hand. "The stories," she said, her voice hollow. "The real estate agent said it was a murder-suicide. The neighbors, they never wanted to talk about it. They just said it was horrible." She looked from me to the laptop screen and back again. "It wasn't him, was it? Mark Henderson? He didn't do it?" "No," I said, my own voice trembling with the certainty of it. "He was a victim, just like them. Something in this house, it used him." A new understanding dawned in her eyes, a terrible, sickening comprehension that mirrored my own from hours before. The pieces clicked into place for her, just like they have for me. The impossibly low price of our dream house, the vague hushed stories, the lingering feeling of unease we both occasionally dismissed as imagination. It was all real. The foundation of our life here was built on a lie that concealed the truth far worse than we could have ever imagined. She took a step closer to the desk and pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Show me," she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't want to. I wanted to smash the laptop, to throw the server into the deepest part of the ocean, to protect her from the poison that was now coursing through my veins. But I knew I had to. She had to understand the nature of the thing we were up against. She had to believe me. With a hand that felt like it was made of lead, I reached out and clicked play. We watched it together. We watched the happy family, the subtle shifts, the growing dread. I saw her flinch when the air began to shimmer behind Mark. I felt her tense up as his expression went slack. Her hand found mine, her grip crushingly tight as we watched the shadow detach itself from the corner of the ceiling and descend upon him. She let out a choked sob as he stood up, his movements no longer his own, and walked out of the room. We didn't need to see the rest.
She knew. She had seen its face. When the clip ended, returning us to the view of the empty hallway, neither of us moved. We just sat there, encased in the blue glow of the screen, our shared reality shattered into a million pieces. The house was silent around us, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a predator that has been seen. "What do we do?" she finally whispered, her eyes full of terror locked on mine. "It's still here. We just saw it." The question hung in the air between us, a fragile thing in a room suddenly thick with menace. "We leave," I said, the words coming out low and guttural, a primal instinct overriding every rational thought. "We leave right now. We grab the server, a bag, and we don't stop driving until the sun comes up." It was a plan born of pure, distilled fear, and in her eyes, I saw the immediate, desperate agreement. This wasn't our home anymore. It was a tomb, and we had just disturbed the ghost that haunted it. The illusion of safety, of a new life we were building within these walls, had been stripped away, revealing the rotten, malevolent framework beneath. We weren't owners. We were trespassers, and our lease had just violently expired. I moved first, my body a coiled spring of adrenaline. I knelt, my hands fumbling with the cables behind the server box. My fingers were clumsy, numb with cold and fear. Each plastic connector I pulled free felt like a tiny victory against the suffocating presence that now filled the house. Sarah was already moving, her fear channeled into a grim, silent efficiency. She pulled a duffel bag from the closet, her movements sharp and precise, grabbing our wallets from the desk, our car keys. We were a team, a single unit propelled by a shared terror. The quiet hum of the server died as I pulled the power cord, and the silence it left behind was deafening. I clutched the cold, heavy metal box to my chest like a holy relic. It was our proof, our witness, the only thing that could explain the madness we were running from. We stood at the office door, poised for flight. I took a deep breath, ready to sprint through the hallway, down the stairs and out into the forgiving darkness of the night. My hand was on the doorknob when it happened. A single, definitive thunk echoed up from downstairs. It was the sound I knew intimately, the sound of the heavy deadbolt on the front door sliding home. My blood ran cold. I twisted the office doorknob. It didn't budge. I rattled it, a frantic, useless gesture. Locked. A moment later, a loud mechanical click came from the breaker box in the basement, and the house was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only light was the faint dying glow of the laptop's battery, casting our terrified faces in a ghostly blue light. It hadn't just been watching. It had been waiting. "It knows," Sarah whispered, her voice a ragged edge of panic. Her hand found my arm, her nails digging into my skin. The house, which had been so silent, came alive around us. A floorboard creaked in the hallway just outside our door. A slow, deliberate weight settling on the old wood. Then a sound drifted up from the living room, faint but unmistakable. The soft, melodic notes of the old music box we'd found in the attic, the one that belonged to the Henderson's little girl. It played its tinny, innocent tune, a grotesque lullaby in the charged darkness. It was toying with us, showing us the extent of its control. Every shadow, every sound was now its weapon. We were no longer in our house. We were inside it. My plan to run felt laughably naive now, the desperate scrambling of a mouse in a trap that had already sprung. We were locked in. The entity was all around us. Flight was impossible. My mind raced, clawing for another option, any option other than to sit here and wait for the door to splinter open.
The server was still clutched in my arms, its weight a sudden anchor of purpose. The Hendersons, they lived here for years. They must have felt it, seen it, long before that final horrific night. "Mark Henderson," I said, my voice shaking as I turned back to the laptop. "He wouldn't have just let this happen. He must have tried to do something, to fight it." It was a desperate hope, a single flickering candle against an ocean of darkness, but it was all we had. Sarah understood immediately. She leaned over my shoulder as I set the server down and hastily plugged it back into the laptop, praying the battery would last. The video files were all we had seen, but a server was more than just a video player. It was a computer. It had a file system, a history. I started digging, my fingers flying across the trackpad, moving past the video folders into system directories, hidden files, temporary caches. The house continued its assault. A soft scratching started at the window, like fingernails on glass. A whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves, seemed to slither under the door, almost forming my name. We ignored it, forcing our world to shrink to the small glowing rectangle of the screen. We were no longer trying to escape the house. We were trying to find its secret. I found it in a fragmented, partially overwritten backup folder. It wasn't a video. It was an audio file, labeled with a string of random numbers. It was corrupted, but I managed to force it open. Static hissed from the laptop speakers, a storm of white noise. But beneath it, there was a voice. Mark Henderson's voice. It was strained, terrified, the sound of a man at the absolute end of his rope. He was reading something, his words broken by ragged breaths and the sound of muffled sobs. An observer. a hunger that does not fade. It is bound to the foundation, to the stone, a name unspoken, a shadow that wears. The static swelled, swallowing his words. But then, for a single horrifyingly clear moment, he spoke a word. It was ancient, guttural, a name that felt like broken glass in my ears. The instant the sound left the speakers, the atmosphere in the room changed. The ambient cold became a piercing, bone-deep freeze. The laptop screen flickered violently, the image of the file explorer distorting as if seen through a heat haze. The faint scratching at the window stopped. The music box downstairs fell silent. All the peripheral haunting ceased, and the entity's full, undivided attention focused directly on our room, on us. A new shadow, darker than the absolute blackness of the power outage, began to bleed from under the office door, pooling on the floor like thick black ink. It spread, coalescing, and in the oppressive, soul-crushing silence, we heard another sound. A slow, metallic scraping from the other side of the door. It was the sound of an old iron key being inserted into the lock. That single metallic scrape was the sound of finality, a key forged in some other colder place, turning the lock on our tomb. My breath hitched, a knot of ice in my throat. Sarah's grip on my arm was the only thing that felt real, her trembling a frantic counterpoint to the dead stillness of the house. The door didn't fly open. It swung inward with a slow, deliberate groan, a movement that was somehow worse than any violent burst. It opened into a corridor that wasn't there, a darkness that was deeper and more absolute than the simple absence of light. And standing at the threshold was a silhouette. It was tall and gaunt, shaped like a man, but utterly devoid of detail, a hole cut out of reality itself. It wasn't a shadow cast by a lack of light. It was a presence made of pure negation. Looking at it hurt my eyes, my brain struggling to process an image that was fundamentally wrong. The figure took one step into the room, and the bone-deep cold intensified, a physical pressure that made my teeth ache. No sound came from its movement, no rustle of clothing, no scuff of a shoe. It was a vacuum, a void that was methodically, patiently advancing to claim us.
My mind, shattered by terror, latched onto the only thing it could, the laptop. Mark Henderson's voice, bound to the foundation, to the stone. What if he wasn't just recording a diary? What if he was trying to leave a weapon? The server wasn't just a box of memories. It was connected to the house. The cameras were its eyes, the intercoms its ears. The wiring in the walls was its nervous system. We weren't in a house with a ghost. We were inside the ghost itself. And right now, its heart, its malignant consciousness, was stepping into the room to stop us. A desperate, insane idea flared in the darkness of my mind. It was a spark of pure, unadulterated madness, born of having no other options. We couldn't fight the figure, we couldn't escape the room, but maybe, just maybe, we could use its own body against it. If the whole house was the entity, then the whole house could feel. The speakers, I choked out, my voice a dry rasp. Sarah, the main system. I fumbled with the laptop, my fingers slipping on the trackpad. The shadow thing was halfway across the room now, and with its proximity came a psychic assault. Flashes of an unfamiliar memory seared my mind. A woman's scream, the smell of gunpowder, the shattering of a child's porcelain doll. It was showing me its work. It was showing me what it did to the Hendersons. It wanted us to feel their despair before it took us. "Keep it back!" I yelled, not knowing what she could possibly do. But Sarah reacted instantly. She ripped the heavy desk lamp out of its socket and hurled it at the figure. It passed straight through the center of the silhouette's chest without any effect, smashing against the far wall. The figure didn't even flinch. It just kept coming. I navigated through the server's control panel, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't an IT expert, but I had set the system up. I knew the basics. I found the master audio output.
the setting that would let me broadcast to every speaker connected to the network, the ones in the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, even the small, tinny one on the front porch. I dragged the corrupted audio file into the broadcast window. The figure was only feet away now. I could feel the life being leached out of the air, the warmth from my own skin. I slammed my finger down on the trackpad. The result was not a sound. It was an event. That guttural ancient name didn't just play from the laptop. It tore its way out of the very bones of the house. It erupted from every speaker at maximum volume, a cacophony of distorted, overlapping blasphemy. The house screamed. It was a physical, structural scream of twisting wood and groaning pipes. The lights flickered on, strobing violently, illuminating a scene of pure chaos. The figure in front of us convulsed, its perfect silhouette shattering into 1,000 writhing, digital-looking fragments. It flickered like a corrupted video file, its form destabilizing as its own nervous system turned on itself. With a deafening boom, the office window behind us shattered inward, and in that same instant, we heard a chorus of loud metallic clicks from all over the house. The locks. They were disengaging. We didn't need to be told. Sarah grabbed the laptop, and I clutched the server to my chest. We pushed past the disintegrating, flickering void and ran. The hallway was a nightmare landscape. The walls seemed to breathe. Portraits of smiling strangers we'd never seen flickered on and off the plaster, and the air itself felt thick and viscous. We thundered down the stairs, stumbling, catching each other. The music box was on the floor, crushed under a fallen bookshelf. We burst through the now unlocked front door and into the cool, damp air of the pre-dawn morning. We didn't stop running until we reached the car, throwing the equipment in the back and peeling out of the driveway with a spray of gravel.
I drove, not looking back, not speaking, until the sun began to break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fragile orange. We were alive. We were free. But we were irrevocably haunted. Now we're here, in a motel room hundreds of miles away, the server sitting on the table between us. It feels like a bomb. It contains the truth. The unedited footage proves Mark Henderson didn't kill his family. It shows the house, the entity, twisting his mind and turning his own hand against the people he loved. It's a record of pure, unadulterated evil. We could release it, clear his name, and expose the real estate company that knowingly sold a tomb to an unsuspecting family. We could warn people. But the server also contains that audio file. It contains the name. A name that gives the listener a terrible power over a malevolent force, but also focuses its undivided attention upon them. To release the proof is to also release the weapon, or the curse. It would be putting a loaded gun on the internet for anyone to find. So now we're left with a choice, and maybe you can help us. Is it our responsibility to warn the world about what's inside that house, even if the warning itself is the most dangerous part of the story? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.